chapter 31, verses 10 through 31. A mostly overlooked story in 2 Kings 11 and 12 presents a sterling example of character, the focus of this lesson. When King Ahaziah of Judah was killed, Athaliah, these names, the queen mother, carried out a bloodbath so she could take control of the throne of Judah. However, before she could kill her grandson, Jehoash, his aunt hid him for 6 years and protected him from Athaliah. At that point, the people ended Athaliah's threat by putting her to death and acknowledged Jehoash as their king. Jehoiada, the high priest, initiated civil and religious reforms, collecting offering to repair the temple. However, years passed and no repairs were made, so eventually King Jehoash intervened. He ordered Jehoiada, these names again, to give the collected funds to the overseers to distribute to the workers who would purchase the needed supplies. Well, at that point, the biblical writer makes this assessment to the overseers to whom the money was given. They did not ask an accounting from those into whose hands they delivered the money to pay out to the workers, for they dealt honestly. That is character. Character means to have the integrity to deal honestly with others. We see another example of character in our text for this lesson. The book of Proverbs closes with an acrostic poem about a woman of character identified as a capable wife. Each of the 22 verses of this portrait begin with a successive letter in the Hebrew alphabet. One commentator suggests that the writer used this alphabetic acrostic to present the A to Z of character. Let us look more closely at the character of this capable wife. So again, the title of our lesson today is Character, and it does come from Proverbs chapter 31, verses 10 through 31. And let's think that character reflects God's ways for us in an integral part of wise living. Today it seems wise to approach the lesson text from two angles. First, we will ask what the text is trying to say within the context of the book of Proverbs. The book is filled with depictions of women, both wise and foolish, some to be pursued and others to be avoided. We should ask how these depictions of women relate to the purpose of Proverbs that is expressed in the statements such as, "Get wisdom, get insight, do not forsake her, and she will keep you. Love her, and she will guard you." Secondly, we should ask what the text means for us today. Does it offer women a reasonable ideal to live up to? Is it trying to help men identify a suitable wife? Or is it doing something else? We are wise to tread cautiously. So what advice have people given you about marriage and family life? What areas did their advice cover? In particular, what have people told you about how to be an ideal spouse or even parent? Does your list describe the perfect marriage or spouse? Why or why not? How do you feel about the items you listed? Is it realistic to expect that a person or a marriage should meet these standards? Why or why not? In today's lesson text, we meet the capable wife described in Proverbs chapter 31. Some women embrace this portrait as an ideal to strive for, where some struggle to apply it to modern life and others dismiss it as outdated. Let's try to reserve judgment until we study the text together. Proverbs chapter 31, verses 10 through 31, continues the sayings of King Lemuel, whom we know nothing about except his name. And this comes from chapter 31, verse 1. Lemuel's sayings come from his mother. Proverbs has highlighted the importance of a mother's teaching and of marrying a good wife. Lemuel's mother, undoubtedly a person of social and political awareness, encourages him to marry a woman of substance and character who makes the most of her role in a patriarchal society and goes beyond it. The lesson text has 3 sections. First, a reflection on the wife's value, a sampling of her industry, and then thirdly, a hymn of praise from her loved ones. The passage forms an alphabetical acrostic poem. Each of its 22 verses begin with successive letters of the Hebrew alphabet, suggesting a comprehensive assessment of the good wife, A to Z. The acrostic form, which is also found in several psalms, aided in memorization. The good woman or wife personifies values that have been praised throughout Proverbs. So this passage provides a fitting conclusion to the book. So let's go into the Bible where we see the verses in praise of a woman. This is from chapter 31, verses 10 through 12. We're going to look at verse 10 first. A capable wife, who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The opening verse of the poem introduces a woman as the object of praise. The Hebrew word used for woman is ishisha. The feminine form of ish, man, isha, can be translated woman, wife, or female. The meaning wife must be inferred from the context. The woman being praised shares the attributes of woman wisdom. She is difficult to find, and she is more precious than jewels. The wife is described as chayil, or capable. Other English translations render the word in various ways: a virtuous woman, a good wife, and a competent wife. Chayil connotes the power and strength of a warrior. Judges chapter 6 verse 12 uses the same word to describe Gideon as a mighty warrior. The wife's husband later says of her, "Many women have done excellently," or chayil. "Many women do noble things," chayil. This woman is a person of valor, nobility, and excellence. The book of Ruth follows Proverbs in the Hebrew Bible. In Ruth chapter 3, verse 11, Boaz uses chayil to describe Ruth as a worthy woman. We see Ruth's underlying strength when she pledges herself to her mother-in-law, Naomi, and to Naomi's God, as well as in her subsequent bold actions. Other biblical women model strength, such as Deborah, who served Israel as a judge and military leader, Esther, who saved her people from genocide, and Mary, who proclaimed God's coming justice while giving birth to the Christ for the world. None of these noble women faced challenges and crises demurely or deferentially. Valorous strength is the wife's chief character trait. As we shall see, she is strong physically, relationally, socially, ethically, and financially. Most importantly, her faith in God is strong. Throughout this lesson, remind you, and I remind you, to focus on how the wife does things, not on the things, the many activities she does. The how will reveal her character traits, which other women can share. So let's go back into the Bible where we read chapter 31, verses 11 and 12. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. The book of Proverbs was designed to teach young men in ancient Israel who were on the verge of adulthood, and marriage was a significant and crucial step toward maturity in that culture. So these verses focus on what the wife does for the husband. The wife's value to her husband calls to mind the benefits of wisdom to those who embrace her. In the culture assumed in Proverbs, the strong wife lives and works within the patriarchal hierarchy. While she is Ishisha, her husband is not Ish. Instead, the text calls him Baal, which means master or lord. The vocabulary fits the context. The queen mother is advising her royal son. At the same time, Proverbs chooses a woman in a male-dominated society to represent the ideal of wisdom. Contemporary readers shouldn't read into this text the idea that the wife's submission to her husband is the basis of her value to him. Even within this patriarchy, her strength and nobility are her own and aren't derived from her subjugation to a man. Verse 11 revisits the woman as a mighty warrior in mentioning no lack of gain. The Hebrew word for gain signifies booty or plunder from her victories. The husband revels in the plunder from his warrior wife's victories. Proverbs 31 begins with the title, The Words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him. There's no way to know who Lemuel was. What is important is that chapter 31 is advice from a queen mother to her son. What do you notice about the mother's advice to her son? What does she say he should avoid? Well, let's look into chapter 31, verses 2 through 9, and see what she says. You are my own dear son, the answer to my prayers. What shall I tell you? Don't spend all your energy on sex and all your money on women. They have destroyed kings. Listen, Lemuel, she says. Kings should not drink wine or have a craving for alcohol, for when they drink, they forget the laws and ignore the rights of the people in need. Alcohol is for people who are dying, for those who are in misery. Let them drink and forget their poverty and unhappiness. Speak up for people who cannot speak for themselves. Protect the rights of all who are helpless. Speak for them and be a righteous judge. Protect the rights of the poor and needy. And then, of course, beginning in verse 10 of Proverbs 31, it introduces the capable woman. She is described as Chayil, which we know in Hebrew is a word often used for mighty male warriors. The wife's husband later says of her, many women have done excellently, Chayil, or many women do noble things, also Chayil. This woman is a person of valor, nobility, and excellence. Some translators render Chayil as capable or competent, though the word actually signifies valiant strength. Would you rather be thought of as capable or as mighty, and why? Ruth is described in the same manner as the strong wife. We see Ruth's underlying strength when she pledges herself to her mother-in-law, Naomi, and to Naomi's God, as well as in her subsequent bold actions. Who are some other biblical women who demonstrated strength? And why would you describe them as strong or valiant? Why is it important to talk about strong biblical women? The husband appears 3 times in this poem, here at the beginning of verse 11, at the center in verse 23, and at the end in verse 28. This repetition highlights the ways the husband benefits from the wife's character, including her industry and integrity. Her value to her husband calls to mind the benefits of wisdom to her followers. So how does the description of the strong woman reflect the description of woman wisdom? What do we make of this similarity? Well, let's go back into the Bible, and we are going to look now at verses 13 through 27. It's a pretty long passage, so listen carefully as we discuss wisdom in action. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchants. She brings her food from far away. She rises while it is still night and provides food for her household and tasks for her servant girls. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hands to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid for her household when it snows, for all her household are clothed in crimson. She makes herself coverings. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the city gates, taking his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She supplies the merchant with sashes. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household, and does not eat the bread of idleness. The woman of valor supervises a large and wealthy household and conducts business within the community's socioeconomic fabric. Purple dye, which was expensive, if you look at the story of Lydia, demonstrates the prosperity she brings to her home. She provides food and clothing, makes wise choices, works with her hands, and does it all in abundant fashion. Note the active verbs that are used to describe her business. Her industry is her own. Her pursuits are self-directed. She girds herself with strength. She is a vigorous and tireless worker. She opens her mouth with wisdom and teaches kindness in what she does and what she says. The Hebrew word hayeth appears in verses 15, 21, and 27. The word literally means house, but appropriately it translates to household in these three occurrences. The word has several levels of meaning. It is the base of the family and their safety, status, and productivity. House can also refer to the entire socioeconomic state of the family. House can describe a hereditary monarchy, as with the house of David. The household setting of Proverbs, chapter 31, from verses 10 to 31, invites comparison with wisdom's house. Like the good wife, wisdom builds her house, sets her table, and teaches the way of insight. She invites people to eat at her table and to learn from her. Lady Folly has a house also. She sits at her door, calling those who are going straight on their way to take a detour. Come to her meal of stolen water and bread eaten in secret. Proverbs demands that the son choose a wife, which means selecting a house built and apportioned by wisdom rather than folly. To want otherwise leads to death. Chapter 31 grants us a glimpse of the young man's life after he chooses well. Wisdom, who was present at the creation of the world, served God as a master worker or architect in setting limits and boundaries and giving order to creation. Wisdom's house and God's creation represent and embody order, balance, abundance, and wise choices. Within the ordinary, everyday activities of the house, the strong wife's activity emulates the goodness and equilibrium of creation. This poem features a sophisticated use of internal repetition known as chiasm. A chiasm includes a series of ideas that are repeated in reverse order. Each idea is connected to its complement by a repeated word or phrase. The term chiasm comes from the Greek letter chi, which looks like our letter X. So let's take a closer look at the long list of the wife's responsibilities. Notice that the writer uses active verbs to describe her work in the home and beyond. Let's compile a list of all the things she does. Wow, do you have a long sheet of paper? Because she does many, many things. What is your initial reaction to the wife's workload? Do you think it is a reasonable amount of work? So if we look back in the text and notice the descriptions of how she completes her work, we also focus on the woman's active work schedule. It is daunting to imagine anyone living up to that ideal. But when we pay attention to the woman's character traits, we can easily imagine men with the same attitudes and motivations. How do you feel about separating the woman's duties from her character traits? Is the description of the woman any less daunting to emulate? Why or why not? So let's go back into the Bible one more time as we look at fearing the Lord. And this comes from verses 28 through 31. Her children rise up and call her happy, her husband too, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her a share in the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the city gates. Now these verses echo the fundamental assertion of the book of Proverbs. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Woman wisdom's strength of character resonates with the fear of the Lord. Now, at its conclusion, Proverbs spotlights an embodiment of what fear of the Lord looks like in everyday life. The three mentions of the husband at the beginning, middle, and the end of the poem suggest that the man is the subject of scrutiny here. If the poem implies a command, it is directed at the husband, the children, and the community. They should praise the woman who embodies wisdom. Psalm 112, another acrostic poem, shares similarities with Proverbs 31, verses 10 through 31, which is our lesson today. It is a hymn of praise to the man who fears the Lord. Scholars who note the similarities suggest that one poem was used as a template for the other. The character traits of the God-fearing man mirror those of the God-fearing woman. Both are to be praised. One aspect of the poem that sounds progressive to contemporary ears is the absence of any mention of the woman's physical beauty and sexuality, aside from the references to children. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Her value to the husband prevents a focus on superficial traits that would lead to the objectification of women and the degeneration of their contributions to society. Again, Proverbs chapter 31, verses 10 through 31 is a poem in praise of the strong woman, not a checklist of home-based activities for women of faith to complete or for men to use when seeking potential mates. Strength of character, expressed through wisdom, benevolence, industry, forward thinking, and love, transcends specific spheres of life. Proverbs exhorts both female and male readers, commit your work to the Lord and your plans will be established. While Proverbs offers broad generalities and no guarantees, we can glean certain skills from wisdom along the way. Being trustworthy, approaching tasks and relationships with diligence, holding our tongues or speaking depending on the situation, giving generously and justly to those in need, and walking in the path of humility. The poem concludes, as it began, with praise for the strong wife. The recurring phrase, the fear of the Lord, provides a fitting conclusion to Proverbs. What does this poem tell you about the woman's character? If you could summarize all of her good qualities in one, what word would you choose? Why? Who has been a strong woman in your life? What about her was strong? How does her strength compare to the woman in Proverbs chapter 31? Is the strong wife a realistic picture of how women could approach their lives? Why or why not? The theme of care for the poor and needy appears throughout Proverbs. It is included in the poem about the strong wife. Why is practicing justice wise? In what ways have we been foolish in the past in our social justice efforts? How can our church follow the wise woman's example by promoting social justice in our community? And why should we? I started this lesson with a call to tread carefully. Some people would say they have not had the life experiences that would make them feel secure in interpreting Proverbs 31, 10 through 31. But You and I both know strong women. Your wives may be strong in many ways enumerated in the poem. Your mothers, your sisters, your friends. She is valiant, and she is an earnest defender of the poor and oppressed people. Your mothers were strong or are strong, negotiating her husband's layoff or change in job, keeping things straight in the home. Let the most persuasive testimony to the strong woman be the strong women you know. Please pray with me. O wise God, show us the way to a life well lived. Give us strength and wisdom to commit every sphere of our lives to you and to your mission in the world. And when we have completed our days on your earth, may people rise up and call us blessed. In Jesus' name, amen.